when you talk about the custody of your data, it's living in a lot of different places in a lot of different ways. That's got to be a really big challenge.
It gets unruly. Catching these things as an earlier stage company is going to be so much easier than when you're scaling fast. It just gets more and more unruly. So being able to understand early, and then also there are things to do to remove the human element so that you can remove the risk without having a human involved. If my employees today can go download anything they want and use a company credit card to pay for a license, then we have a freaking problem.
Yeah.
And if they're able to get access to my customer data and upload that into a third-party application, that's a big problem. So how can we incorporate some tools to where that doesn't happen? Now your tool list doesn't grow. You don't have all these complexities that we just spoke of. You can just kind of move on to greener pastures. And we highly recommend taking that action as soon as possible because it's a much easier exercise than having to go through this after the proverbial cat is out of the bag and you found out you've been compromised.
Welcome back to IT Visionaries. I'm your host, Chris Brandt, and my guest today is Taylor Hersom, CEO of Eden Data. Taylor's a former CISO who's helped dozens of fast-growing companies turn security from a necessary hurdle into a sales advantage. He's worked with venture-backed startups and Fortune 500 brands, and his focus is simple. Trust should accelerate growth, not slow it down. Today, we're talking about why compliance is becoming a competitive differentiator, the real AI security risks leaders are missing, and what Compliance 2.0 looks like as trust becomes core to your brand. Taylor, welcome to the show.
Chris, thank you so much for having me. Honored to be here.
Yeah, no, it's going to be fun. I love talking security. So, let's dig into it.
Let's do it.
So, before we get all the way into that, talk a little bit about what Eden Data is and what you do.
Absolutely. So we are essentially the outsourced security, compliance, and or privacy teams for companies all over the world. So as a business that absorbs data, you typically have at least some set of security and compliance requirements that you need to adhere to protect that data. So we are the team that you can lean on to take over those responsibilities and help you build something that you can brag about to the world in regards to a security program, because it's closing deals. It's winning customers' hearts and minds and building trust on the internet.
Yeah, for sure. And so what kind of companies do you typically work with?
It's a lot of venture-backed companies. So we service anything from pre-revenue, maybe seed round funding companies, all the way up to publicly traded organizations that have matured to a point that they have a robust security program in an IT environment. But a lot of our customer base really falls in that SaaS bucket. They are inherently the ones collecting the most data on the internet.
Yeah, well, and I think that's an interesting market too, because you have a lot of very technical people typically in that crowd who are builders, who are really rapidly developing and lots of MVPs and things like that. But security is not always the first thing on their mind, I imagine.
No, usually it's innovation before security, and so they bring us in to take that over. And yes, you have these brilliant minds that are building really cool products on the internet, but they don't want to deal with security and compliance like that. SOC 2 makes their eyes cross.
Yeah, they are not you don't become an entrepreneur because you like to follow rules.
Exactly. Yeah, really well summarized. Exactly.
So, okay, so you did mention the compliance thing and helping people get themselves in order, and that can potentially be a strategic differentiator. I mean, can you talk about what you're seeing in the market and how compliance is really factoring into things these days?
Yeah, absolutely. So the cybersecurity industry as a whole is fairly new in the grand scheme of things. Everybody's had marketing and finance and the product building teams for decades, but for cybersecurity, it just started to become really popular in 2010 and beyond. And so now you kind of have finally 15 years later, after this has finally become a thing and there's careers around it, there is this new emphasis on, hey, we're collecting a lot of data. That data has some level of sensitivity to it. I need to be able to protect that data. And so a lot of companies are going and adopting various compliance standards as a way to prove to their customers, hey, look at these are the things I'm doing to protect your data. So really, there's regulation, and then there is customer demand. Regulation is the law. You have to HIPAA,
Right.
for example. You gotta do some things to protect public personal health information. And then you also have the Walmarts of the world that are saying, in order for me to adopt your SaaS tool, you need to adhere to my security standards, and you need to have your SOC 2 attestation or ISO certification. And you got all these darn acronyms, but that's really the trend that's happening right now, is that security is being used to close deals to win customers, because it's an expectation in order for them to do business with you.
Well, and I got to say that like the two things that are absolutely top of mind that I talk to everybody about, it's like cybersecurity and AI. And like it's interesting because you deal with both of those issues. But I mean, with all of the various compliance and regulatory frameworks out there, how do you like what's when everybody's looking at, like we heard about, it used to be SAS 70, and then that became SOC 2. And then, we have PCI and all the DSS stuff. And then we've got, 27,001, 42,001, ISO stuff. I mean, like every day it's something new, it feels like. And there's all these, standards and when a company's out there and they're trying to make this a competitive differentiator for them, how do you like help them map themselves back to what they should be doing?
Yeah. First of all, a lot of the acronyms from the industry, so I applaud you. There's a lot of
I've been in the industry, unfortunately. So.
But really what we do, there's typically this knee-jerk reaction in the industry of, hey, I'm going to go and sell my software to all these customers, and one of them randomly came back and asked me for, let's say, SOC 2. So rather than customers understanding or brands understanding what is SOC 2, they typically just, the customer says jump and they say how high. And so they chase after SOC 2. What we do with our customers is we try to take a step back and help them understand, what the heck are you trying to accomplish with your business? Because it has to align with your business objectives. And so you named two great examples, SOC 2 and ISO 27001. There's customers of ours that only operate in the US. And so SOC 2 makes more sense. But then there are customers that go global, and ISO 27001 is honored a lot more and recognized a lot more outside of the US borders. So having those philosophical conversations, and then also understanding what type of data they're collecting, few other things around their business model, we then work into hey, this is the near-term objective. Here are some things you should think about. It gets even more complicated when you have compliance standards and then you have security standards. You go from going and trying to pass an audit or protecting yourself against an auditor and getting a certification to then having to protect yourself against a hacker. How do you just mitigate risk? Nobody's expecting you to do that. There's not a lot of laws and regulations enforcing purely cybersecurity, and yet you should do that so you don't end up in the news. And so it's a weird industry because you've got that two-pronged I guess demand. And so you have to kind of figure out, where is my business and which one makes sense at this time.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, two interesting ones like SOC 2 and ISO 27001. And could you talk a little bit about like how the requirements differ? Because SOC 2 is kind of, you set your own standards and then you adhere to them. Whereas 27001 is a little bit more prescriptive about like the things that you need to do. Kind of like the PCI standards are very prescriptive in what you need to do. Can you talk about like how that impacts a business and like how that makes one more or less difficult than the other?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you summarize it well. First of all, with SOC 2, there is a misconception that you have to just go and adopt these frameworks and adhere to them exactly. But in reality, standards like SOC 2, you're supposed to customize it for your own environment. You can add and remove requirements and then hire an auditor to attest against those requirements. Whereas ISO, that's a governing body. They have standards that go well beyond cybersecurity. They got 9001 and you mentioned 42,001 and they have a bazillion different ISO certifications.
9001 is the one I always grew up with.
Yeah.
ISO 9001 certified.
They've been around for a while, and it's a great auditing body, or not auditing body, but a certification body. But because of
it's a great international standardization organization.
Yeah, exactly. I should have started with that, of what the heck ISO stands for, because that summarizes it all right there. But really that means that
Aptly
it's much
named.
more rigid and you can't change it. And so you're having to adhere to the specific requirements outlined by, say, ISO 27001. And so I share all that to say, really in terms of difficulty, it's really just understanding the two different forms of pig Latin here, right? So SOC 2 and ISO 27001 both require a little bit of knowledge around what do they mean and what do I need to do. And then there's like a 50% overlap between those two standards. So you work on one and you've already got a head start on the other, but they're not the same. And so that's when you have these companies that are growing bigger and bigger, and they're having to add more certification standards and more audit requirements as they scale because their customers are asking for it. So before you know it, we have customers that have 10 different frameworks that they adhere to, and they got to track all that simultaneously.
Yeah, like I mean, could you speak to like say somebody's like going for a SOC 2, right? And they have to like define what their controls are going to be for that SOC 2. Yeah. Would you recommend that a company that's doing that like pick some standard that's going to apply to other certifications down the road so that they kind of start off down the road, you know, maybe make it a little more difficult at the front, but easier at the back end? How would you, you know, consult with that?
Yeah, we do advise our customers, if you have a plan to adopt additional frameworks on the back end, then let's talk about how do we, at least when we're building, that we're building towards multiple standards when feasible, rather than having to go through this exercise of restarting every single time you're working on a net new framework. And so typically we are advising customers to first figure out that plan that I talked about in the beginning.
Right.
And then understand if you're going to be adding complexity to your environment, then let's figure out a way that we can kill two birds with one stone here and figure out something that's going to work today and 12 months from now.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned something else that I think is a really interesting perspective, right? I mean, you've got all these frameworks, and I think another really interesting one that's kind of hit the stage lately is the European DORA standards, which seem to be being integrated into all kinds of new standards around security here in the U.S. and other places as well. But there's fundamentally, when you're looking at the security side of it, it isn't, you know, like compliance and security are kind of two separate things, right? Yeah. And while compliance can help you attest to certain, you know, security standards, sometimes it's at odds with security even, right? Because you have to do some things and then you start putting in compensating controls and you got 20 different compliance standards and you have to adhere to all of them and they're maybe not aligning properly. And so what do you say to that when you're like trying to figure out the security around all that?
Oh my goodness. Unfortunately, this is where, especially at Eden, we've kind of educated customers that at the end of the day, you're not going to have brands that are investing wholly in security if they're not required to. It's just human nature. So how can we invest in compliance that's going to allow for that company to grow, which therefore allows them to have bigger budget to put towards things like cybersecurity and mature their practices? But how can we also take some of these compliance standards, use them as a North Star, and appropriately still address risk throughout the organization? Because to your point, those things do contradict each other. I briefly mentioned this previously, but we ask our customers, are you protecting yourself against an auditor or a hacker? Because sometimes those are the same thing and sometimes they're different. When you're just trying to pass an audit, there's some ways you can, it's just like going through a test. There's some ways you can juice those answers. And unfortunately, you're not especially if it's not a robust audit, you're not necessarily addressing any associated risk. And the SOC 2 standard, for example, there's not a lot around things like threat intelligence and vulnerability management. And so you've got pockets of your environment that aren't even being looked at. And they're still important. They're just not important in the eyes of SOC 2, for example. So really figuring that out and making sure you understand what you're trying to accomplish is critical. And then there are ways it just takes a little bit more effort to collaborate between security and compliance.
Yeah. So what would you say is, you know, the biggest risk for, like, you're working with a lot of startups here. Like, so when you go out to talk to them, you know, I'm sure that like the last thing they want to do is like pause their development, get organized and, you know, like start following some rules rather than just build. You know, like what do you say to them? Like, why? How do you communicate the importance of these things?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you've kind of alluded to it, but developers hate security professionals typically because it's just they see it as a blocker, right? They want to move
Right.
fast and break things and deploy code, and by adding additional what we call controls, where they have additional hoops they need to jump through, is upsetting to people, understandably so. That being said, the way that we advise it is that, look, you're selling to the Walmarts of the world, and they are scrutinizing your environment. So when you've got a few requirements. You've got Walmart says I need SOC 2. Well, you need to produce that certification, that attestation. That's easy. But then you are typically you're filling out what we call security questionnaire. So you're answering 100 questions on all the things you do for security. And then you're also signing a contract with Walmart. And in that contract, it says, I'm going to do all this security stuff and I'm going to maintain it. Well, now you just legally bound yourself to a customer. So if you start lying on those questionnaires or you stop doing things that you said you would do, then you're getting yourself into a real pickle. And that's something that we educate our customers on because they don't think about that. When you add privacy onto this, now you got a fourth leg of this crazy stool, and you've got more requirements that you need to adhere to. So it just gets further complicated, but the last thing that a company wants is to get sued by a customer that's much bigger than them.
Yeah, well, and I think that if you look at the stats out there right now, these third-party supply chain attacks are really big ones. And if you're talking about a SaaS company, they're going to be a target, like especially kind of a startup that's working with a really big company like that. Exactly. They're going to be a target, right?
Yeah, and speaking of Target, you had like the Target breach and Home Depot breach, and you had SolarWinds and a variety of others where all of those vendors, SolarWinds was the vendor in that case, but were held responsible, and there's legal battles galore. Like those are going to put any small SaaS company out of business, right? And so there's a lot of financial implication. It's just so hard in security to tie a dollar value to security, right? You're talking about a threat or a risk, and that hasn't transpired. And so you're supposed to say, well, the opportunity is that we don't go out of business, so that's worth $1 million. But it's in reality, like it's not costing them $1 million right now. So it's very easy to skip over security.
Yeah, and I think when you look at getting hacked can be an existential problem for a company. Like having an outage is like a bad day, but getting hacked can be significant. And if you look at even some of the big hacks, it's a financial event as much as anything else. If you look at like Equifax, when they got hacked, they lost $5 billion in market cap in like the first 3 days. I mean, those are kind of quantifiable numbers, but it's hard for I think people to wrap their heads around that. Like, these cyber extortion events can be capital events as well, right?
Agreed. Yeah. And it doesn't help when the Equifaxes and the Facebooks and the Googles of the world, they get charged $1 bazillion as a fine. And that's just a drop in the bucket for them. But what we try to explain to the average size SaaS startup, you're trying to survive. You're trying to get to your next series round. You're trying to close more business. But this is one of those survival mechanisms that you have to pay attention to, because one lawsuit will put anyone out of business. It's unfortunately, we've seen it happen a few times. And so you've got this industry built on fear mongering, and a lot of it is unjustified, but there is definitely some justification. I just think that there's a better way. It's a carrot versus the stick, right? If you can focus on showcasing, look, cybersecurity actually does allow you to close more business with bigger companies, then people pay attention more.
I mean, do you have any good examples of companies you've worked with that like really made that true?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a bunch of customers that we have featured on our website, but we have a lot of companies. Like I can think of one that's near and dear to my heart is KindBody. We've been able to serve them for since the entirety of that Eden's been around, so over 4 years. And they are a company that has been able to continue to scale rapidly because they are investing more and more in security. And they've gone from having just a handful of customers when we first started to the biggest brands in the world. And they've grown to a pretty substantial size. They were able to lean in on, I mean, it was going to be a blocker eventually. And so they invested early, and it worked out really well for them.
This episode of IT Visionaries is brought to you by Meter, the company building better networks. Businesses today are frustrated with outdated providers, rigid pricing, and fragmented tools. Meter changes that with a single integrated solution that covers everything: wired, wireless, and even cellular networking. They design the hardware, write the firmware, build the software, and manage it all so your team doesn't have to. That means you get fast, secure, and scalable connectivity without the complexity of juggling multiple providers. Thanks to Meter for sponsoring. Go to meter.com/ITV to book a demo now. That's meter.com/ITV. So, we mentioned it earlier, like the two things that everybody wants to talk about is cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. And I think even better than that is cybersecurity for artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Right? I mean, so, I got to imagine you're talking to a lot of companies about, AI, and, like we mentioned 42001, which is specifically targeted towards AI. What are you seeing out there right now?
Yeah. So first of all, AI is kind of a blessing and a curse to the security industry. So the curse is that I guess the blessing is that there is a substantial opportunity for security professionals to lean in on an entirely new industry related to cybersecurity. So how do you protect AI? How do you protect the data that you're collecting? How are you protecting the models that you're building? How are you giving your customers comfort in how you're using that? That's a whole industry in and of itself, for a sub-industry within security. So ISO 42001, the NIST AI RMF framework, there's multiple popping up where just becoming specialized in that creates new career opportunities. I'm excited about that part. Eden's looking at these things. We're advising customers today on those standards, and it's working out really well. The curse is that people still, just like when SOC 2 started and just like when the cybersecurity industry as a whole started, people have a hard time giving a damn. They want to go and they build AI models because they want to add AI functionality to their SaaS tool that they can then offer to Walmart and be more relevant in the industry. But they're not thinking about security because this is brand new and nobody's ever had to talk about it before. There's also no regulation. There's not a lot of requirements. Even the Walmarts of the world are not coming out and saying explicitly you need to have these AI certifications in place. So I share all that to say that it's kind of a weird time, but the biggest issue right now is that nobody's really paying attention to security around the AI models that they're building, and you're absorbing just a tremendous amount of data. Most of it's not sensitive and it's not worth anything, but there's people uploading things into the free version of ChatGPT left and right. You've got folks that are training their new AI tools on their own customers' data, even though they don't have anything in their legal contracts that allow them to do that. Like, it's kind of the Wild West.
Well, you mentioned like people are uploading things to OpenAI all the time. I don't think people understand that they're actually doing that either. So what do you see as like the biggest misunderstandings people typically have in AI right now?
I think we got trapped in this mode of freemium where you can get access to just about any tool on the internet, and we as a society just didn't stop to understand what the free version really means, and really what it's nothing is truly free. How do you think they're making money? They're absorbing your data and using it to better their products. Now that's being exacerbated, and OpenAI is no different. They are on the free versions, and even some of their paid versions. You're inherently agreeing for them to be able to use your data in any way they see fit. Really, the only way to protect that as a business is to be on the enterprise account and explicitly specify, don't use my data. But it's kind of crazy because it's a knee-jerk reaction. We just kind of jump in and say, ooh, free, shiny new tool. And we don't really specify or look at what this means when we start uploading things into it.
Yeah, I mean, there's like always the free as in speech, free as in beer, and then free as in free puppies kind of approach to it. And I think it's kind of more in the free puppies realm right now.
Yeah, that's so true. It's also, you can take it a step further. And I just think about all these people that use these platforms and are uploading really personal information about themselves.
Yeah.
And we're getting in this new era where people just inherently trust AI. And so they're giving more and more data. There's AI health practitioners and AI psychologists and all kinds of crazy stuff popping up out there. But you're sharing just an incredible amount of data, very, very sensitive, that could just, I mean, look at the genetic data that's now been breached half a dozen times and the implications of that. Like there's just so many, I guess it's a butterfly effect, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of AI is really the Wild West right now. I mean, there's not a lot of governance around it to start with.
Yeah.
And then and there's so many aspects of it that are challenging, like all the way from the security challenges of prompt injections and things like that, attacking the model itself, to just like the privacy issues, like you talked about, the regulatory, issues, even, and then like the idea of like the data provenance piece of it, like where's this data coming from, and who owns it, and do you have the rights to use it, or is it PII data, or whatever. I mean, how do you advise people on the craziness of AI right now?
Right now, we are educating more than anything, because customers need to understand basically what they're getting themselves into, and we as their advisors need to be able to appropriately point out to them the implications of going and spinning up a new model and adding a new AI feature to your platform. And so thankfully we're kind of man in the middle in those cases and are able to catch we have a lot of customers that will proactively just pull us in and say, we need to start talking through how to build this appropriately. And then we can help them build controls and mechanisms to do this in a way that is allowing them to accomplish what they want, but also being respectful to their customers and not breaching contracts along the way. There are definitely customers that are finding out that legally they have to go and sign new contracts with their customers in order to be able to appropriately use that data. And then there's implications around basically what data they can and can't use, what they can and can't do with their models. So really, it's just talking through all of that, and similar to what we talked about at the beginning of the podcast of just helping them, taking a step back and having a philosophical conversation on what you're trying to accomplish and figuring out a mechanism to do it without saying, "Oh, you just can't do that because it's against the rules, or you're not allowed to do this for your customers." It's not going to do us any good to tell customers they can't go and make their product better.
Yeah, well, and if you think about the implications of things like GDPR and the right to be forgotten, once this data has been used in training and is integrated into the models, that's going to be a hard thing to forget at that point, right?
There's been incredible tools on the market for, at least 5 years. We've worked with a few of them, and they are data discovery tools, for lack of a better term. But that has not been popular unless you're the biggest enterprises in the world, right? And so now we suddenly have to go towards that, because we need to figure out, people don't know where their data is being stored. They don't know what type of data is being stored. They don't know where it's being used. There's all these implications, right? And so we're going to have to backtrack, and we're making it more and more unruly right now. But at some point, the hammer is going to drop. To your point, GDPR is just one of many examples where people are going to have to understand better what data they're using and where.
So like, tell me, like, if you're talking to somebody who's trying to wrap some governance around AI, what are like the first 3 things they should do? Where do they start?
Yeah, this is what's so crazy about security in general, is that all these breaches, all these problems that we have are usually caused by very simple things and not complicated things. So with AI, it's no different. One of the things that people need to start with is simply, what systems am I using and what data am I collecting, and documenting that. Just putting it, the average SaaS company out there has no idea what SaaS applications they're using internally, which ones that their employees in HR had turned on the AI function to play around with, where they're storing their data beyond their critical infrastructure. So getting your arms wrapped around that is a huge step in the right direction, simply because then you know what you can actually protect. And from there, it's starting to understand, okay, well, there's going to be a bunch of junk systems, and I either need to figure out, do those junk systems have data in them because employees keep uploading things and I need to cut these chunk systems. Very, very easy to do, actually. It just requires active effort to go and block and prevent people from downloading every SaaS tool on the internet.
Right.
Or is it something that is, okay, this is a junk tool and it doesn't have sensitive data, so I'm just going to focus on my critical stuff. I'm going to focus on the things that are required for me to provide my service to a customer, that contain sensitive data that I have contractual obligation to protect. That is the starting point. From there, using a North Star, like a lot of people, companies think they have to invent their own controls. And you alluded to this in the beginning of SOC 2 and ISO and those things being a baseline. There's a lot of great standards out there. You don't need to make up your own security program. You can just go pull one of those off the shelf. Sorry, not one of those. In the case of AI, it's going to be something like ISO 42001, the NIST AI RMF framework, and work your way down the list of, okay, this makes sense. This doesn't make sense. We need to incorporate this new procedure into our environment. That is the easiest thing to do in the grand scheme of things, because you can at least start to address risk rather than sitting there and talking about it, right? And so those are the main things that I would focus on right out of the gates. Beyond that, it's really, how can we incorporate what it is that you're building, these things that we just talked about? How can I brag about it to my customers? Because you might as well, right now, SOC 2 and ISO and all of those are table stakes. But if you start coming out and saying, look, we have built an AI security program. Here are the things that we're doing to protect your data. That suddenly just became a differentiator, because not very many companies are doing that today.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about having contracts, but you have to choose your tools really well too. I mean, because even like OpenAI, for example, I know that they recently had a lawsuit, and as part of the lawsuit, even though they say with their commercial version, it's your data and it's private, but they were under court orders to retain a lot of that data still.
Yeah.
And so, that when you talk about the custody of your data, it's living in a lot of different places in a lot of different ways. That's got to be a really big challenge as well.
It gets unruly. And so one of the things we advise in general is catching these things as an earlier stage company is going to be so much easier than when you're scaling fast. It just gets more and more unruly. And so being able to understand early, and then also there are things to do to remove the human element so that you can remove the risk without having a human involved. And what I mean by that, very simple example, is something like shadow IT. If my employees today can go download anything they want and use a company credit card to pay for a license, then we have a freaking problem. And if they're able to get access to my customer data and upload that into a third-party application, that's a big problem. And so how can we incorporate some tools to where that doesn't happen? Now your tool list doesn't grow. You don't have all these complexities that we just spoke of. You can just kind of move on to greener pastures. And we highly recommend taking that action as soon as possible, because it's a much easier exercise than having to go through this after the proverbial cat is out of the bag and you found out that you've been compromised in some form or fashion.
Yeah, and AI is popping up in everything now too. Everything. So like it's not even transparent when you are using AI all the time. Yeah,
agreed. And we can't rely on humans to just have the wherewithal to understand. Like we are creative creatures, but attention to detail is not always our strong suit. And so I think that the phishing trainings and the security awareness trainings, those are helpful to a degree because they're educational. But they're not going to stop risks at an organization, especially with the boon of AI. And this just becomes more and more complicated. So how do I remove the human altogether? This isn't like a replace everyone with robots. This is let's just make processes more automated and less manual and have humans focus on what they're good at.
Well, what about the idea of transparency too? I mean, do you encourage your customers to be very transparent about what they're doing with AI?
Yes. So we are always advising our customers to get ahead of this train on talking about what they are doing. First of all, sharing it with us
Yeah.
internally. I think there's this misconception of your security team is also your auditor, right? And that's a no. We're the good guys. I was an external auditor for a period of time. Shout out to all the auditors, but that comparatively, the security team is meant to catch things before it gets bad, and so sharing that with us is something that we encourage. And then just being transparent with the customer. Hey, these are the things that we're doing with AI, and these are the things we're not doing. And then also just collecting, this seems like a rudimentary piece of advice, but you're going to get feedback from your customers. Put that in a centralized document and collect that feedback. And then you're going to start to see patterns on, oh, I get asked all the time how our AI model is using a customer's data specific to this module in our product, for example. So coming up with documentation around that and then being proactive and saying, don't worry, customer, we've already got this figured out for the next customer in line. You're just gonna reinforce that trust between you and the customer, and it's a beautiful thing. So like, I don't know why people avoid it, because it's inevitable. Might as well
Yeah.
lean into it and create a sales opportunity.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of people out there who don't trust AI. And so that can work against the business, I would imagine, where like, yeah, the trust isn't there. And I think transparency is probably the best way to counteract that, right?
Absolutely, yeah. In leaning in, saying that we we want you to trust us. So here are the things we're doing to earn that trust. That's a sales differentiator. Right now, it's easier than ever to spin up a SaaS application, and you've got no code agents, and you've got me as a complete Neanderthal can go and spin up an application these days. So how do you stand out from the crowd? If it's not features, it's got to be other things. And so the marketing and how the security aspect of marketing is an important factor in all of this, in my humble opinion. I realize I'm biased, but I see it working time and time again.
Well, you mentioned shadow IT, and I think that, and you mentioned agents and like people like using AI to build agents and things like that. And
Yeah.
you can quickly build an MVP with AI, but like that doesn't seem particularly secure to me. How do you like, I don't know if it's education or how do you combat that sort of like sense that, oh, well, it works on my desktop, it should be great. Let's go, kind of mentality.
Yeah, but really within, first of all, pointing out if a customer of ours is going in and using a bunch of free trials from a bunch of different tools to spin up their first AI model and that MVP product that you speak of, pointing out, hey, look at all the ways you just compromised this limited data set because you just adopted a bunch of free trials, like helping them educating them, knowing that they're not going to know how to go and identify a risk associated with their organization. They're focused on building a great product. So pointing that out and then helping to understand, okay, well, how this works on your desktop, but what are the implications when you absorb your entire data set within your infrastructure into this? What happens when you start giving customers access and where it's going to be stored, and being able to point out other security flaws and then giving them a roadmap on what we can do to help address that. That's how we handle it. They're not thinking about this, right? And they shouldn't be. That's not their jobs. I'm not going to sit here and preach that everyone should care about security, because it can be a very boring topic to a lot of people unless you're nerdy like me.
Yeah.
And so I do think that just encouraging them to lean on the folks around them to kind of collaborate on incorporating security while still encouraging them to build great products is the tactic that's worked really well for me personally and for Eden.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on that point, I hear so many companies talking about their struggle to find security people, like
Yes.
people who are, it's just like AI too. AI is another great one, like, and security and AI together, forget about that. Right. But I mean, it's hard for folks to find security people. What is your recommendation to organizations that are struggling with these things, but they maybe don't have the money to pay for, a security person? They can't find them in their market. What do you recommend?
Yeah, this is I mean, this is one of the biggest reasons why I started Eden initially. This is not a plug for Eden. It's more of the security professionals are they're there's three problems. One, they're scarce. Two, they're expensive. And three, burnout is very real in the security industry comparative to other industries. It's a stressful job. It's a thankless job a lot of times. And so for those reasons, there are great providers out there. Like the business model that we've done is to be an augmented portion of the team for less than the cost of a full-time employee. But honestly, there's a lot of things that a founder or an executive or even just an IT analyst at a company can focus on that are actually quite easy. You don't need a specialist for in order to start actively addressing risk. The things like what we talked about of just identifying what your critical systems are, just identifying what is the types of data that you're collecting. Those two things, helping you understand what those are, and then what your what systems are essentially need to be focused on, is a really, really powerful and easy exercise to take. So I would encourage folks that I get it as a founder, like you just are many conflicting priorities and you don't want to focus on a topic that bores the hell out of you. But if you can focus a little bit of time on this each week or pull in team members to focus on the really easy stuff, there is quite a few things that can be done that do not require expertise from cybersecurity professionals. Yeah.
Well, and I think a lot of companies have that challenge too, where, they're a widget maker and they want to hire a security professional, and a security professional wants to do security, not come to a company that makes widgets and like try to, set up everything and, build boxes and, stuff like that. I mean, so I find it really hard. You talk about burnout. I find it really hard for some companies to keep security professionals happy in general or satisfied in their career, right? Yeah. And whereas like a company like yours, where like a security professional can come to a company like yours and do security all day long, every day of the week, right? And so that's a much more appealing place for them to land, I would think. Do you think that companies should just really embrace the idea of like going outside of their company to like get this kind of help?
Well, so I will call out that first of all, I understand that I'm a security professional at a consulting firm, but the premise that I've always had in my mind is that as a cybersecurity professional, there's 114 different security domains out there of specialties that you can have. It is impossible for any one person or any 10 people to be able to have the skill sets related to that. And you as a company don't know I'm not saying all 114 are relevant to your organization, but a subset of them are. And part of the discovery is figuring out which of them are and then focusing on them. So to be able to find talent that can actually work on those things, is it enough work to fulfill a full-time position? There's companies that haven't budgeted for this. For all these reasons, the way that I view it is that you're going to see a bigger uptick in folks leaning on third parties because you have an Eden Data. We have 70 people on our security team that all have different backgrounds, and you just pull in different people as needed. That's going to need to happen. It's the law firm model, right? You have general counsel in-house, but even as you scale, those general counsel members typically pull in third parties because they're looking for specialty law firms, right? Same thing's happening in security. That's going to continue to happen. And so when I started Eden, I thought that, we're going to work with like emerging companies and then they're going to grow out of us. But it's worked out really well that I'm thankful for, is that you just have all these different complexities. So even the big dogs with huge teams, they need all the help they can get. And the security as a whole is a underserved industry, and it's only growing more precarious by the year.
Yeah, and I think that I think to have a good security organization, you have to have a culture of security.
Totally.
And, whereas like a company like yours, you can build that kind of culture of security. It's very hard for some organizations to build that kind of culture. And I see so many companies, and even, companies in tech that want to get into the security space,
right?
But they don't have that culture of security at their core. And I think because of that, they really struggle. I mean, do you see that?
Absolutely. I mean, you're not going to, the average employee is not going to want to give a damn about security if they see the co-founders ignoring the security awareness trainings and not showing up for, the live security meetings and such. You have to have buy-in from the top, and you have to be able to ingrain that, hey, this is really important, because the livelihood of all of us kind of depends on us being able to make sure that this is buttoned up. I think that you can do culture right as it comes to security, but we've seen it done very wrong in creating a toxicity around it. And then also just not appreciating, unfortunately, the security teams. It is a thankless job largely, because you're doing a bunch of things in the background to prevent things from happening. You're not creating things necessarily.
And the people you're working for are working against you every day.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. They see this as a cost center, and convincing them otherwise is a very, very hard thing to do.
I think that's where you like double down on, like, a security event is a capital event for you too. So like, even if you're a privately held company, it can be a significant capital event for you.
It's just, it's very much human nature that we want to bury our heads in the sand unless we feel the pain of something or we felt it in the past. We just want to avoid at all costs. And so there are some amazing founders out there that are proactively investing in security from the start. And that is awesome to see, because it gives them it's helping them avoid the conversations of, we get plenty of customers that come in and they've been scaling, and all of a sudden they get asked, they have this huge contract that they're not going to be able to sign because they don't have SOC 2. And they say, well, dang, like, what do I do now? And they come talk to us, and we say, look, it's going to be 4 to 6 months of building.
Yeah.
And they've been caught with their pants down, for lack of a better term. And it's unfortunate to see that, because it really creates a delay in your trajectory at a time when that's paramount.
IT Visionaries is powered today by Meter, because every great business relies on great networks. If you're a network engineer, you know how critical uptime, control, and visibility are. Too often, you're stuck troubleshooting issues across fragmented systems or locked into legacy solutions that don't scale. Meter reimagines networking from the ground up. Their full-stack solution, from ISP procurement to security, routing, wireless, and beyond, gives you deep control and the performance you need. No more piecing together providers or worrying about bottlenecks. Just seamless, scalable connectivity built for today and tomorrow. Big thanks to Meter for sponsoring. Visit meter.com/ITV to book your demo now. That's meter.com/ITV. So when you're working with your customers and you walk into an organization, I got to imagine you see, like you said, some that just have the absolute wrong culture and the wrong approach to it all. But you probably do see some good, well, at least when you leave, you see some good companies doing it well. I mean, like, when you look at the companies that do it well, what is it that they do differently?
In terms of security in general?
In terms of security, yeah, in general. Yeah,
I would say that, first of all, back to the culture comment, they are incorporating security into their DNA. And so making it very important from the offset, making sure that the entire company knows what is being accomplished, going and celebrating wins like, hey, we just got our SOC 2 attestation. We're working towards ISO 27001, giving your security team shout outs. That goes a really long way. And then also being able to, there a lot of our more mature companies, we've been able to essentially showcase, hey, this $1 million deal came in and they needed SOC 2 and ISO 27001. They need you to fill out the security questionnaire. And we did all those things and you close the deal. Suddenly the security team now is a hero.
Top line. They're dealing with top line revenue.
Now you've got a dollar amount of, hey, this would not have happened otherwise. So pointing that out is one thing, but having the executives at the company understand that and brag about it goes a long way. A huge differentiator. So those kinds of things work out really well. And then the last thing I would say is that you would be shocked at how many companies just refuse year after year to give budget to the security team. And they're just saying, we don't have a budget for this. You're just going to have to figure it out. And so the companies that are proactively understanding, okay, we need to go for ISO 27001 yet next year, but it's going to unlock Europe for us. Like, being able to tie those two things together, that's a differentiator.
Being strategic.
Yeah.
I mean, I find that so often companies get their budget from a cybersecurity incident.
I know.
Which is the wrong way to do it.
Right?
I mean, what do you say? What do you say in those situations? Like, I told you so, or like,
I know there's not much you can say. We certainly on the Eden side, you kind of have to have a CYA for a lot of things, just simply because there are plenty of things that we advise on that a customer chooses not to do. And there are unfortunate events that can happen from that. And thankfully, we haven't had to deal with that yet. But there's only the things that we know about too. So there's all these things that we don't even know about. And so when a customer is not paying attention to those things and not seeing the importance of it and waiting until they have to experience a very painful event, you're jeopardizing the company. You're creating a lot of issues. And on our end, it's really we have to make sure we're dialed in on the CYA front of the not come out and say I told you so, but if they ask,
Right.
be like, well, technically we did tell you so, and here's the proof.
Yeah, and we talked about AI earlier and sort of the issues internally for a company who's deploying AI, but the other side of AI is that it's become a sort of a threat vector in the sense that it's enabling a lot of new types of attacks. When you're talking about phishing or voice phishing or like even like deep fakes and Zoom calls that like are impersonating people and things like that. I mean, AI has like really introduced a whole different dynamic into the equation too. And it seems like we're at an inflection point, I think, too, where it's a very rapidly changing. It's always been a rapidly changing space, but I mean, like now, like on steroids. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
10x what I think it used to be. Like I think some companies get into a sense of like helplessness around that
Totally.
too. And like how do you like, come on, buck up, little buddy. You can do this. Like how do you encourage them to, get on with their efforts?
Yeah, the pep talk, right?
The pep talk, yeah.
First, by defining one of the tactics that we use is helping our customers understand kind of the competitive landscape and the competitive advantage that they may or may not have over some of the companies that they're butting heads with. So pointing out that you really can't ignore this. It's eventually, with absolute certainty, going to become a thing. And your customers are already asking about this. They're just going to ask about it more, and eventually they're not going to sign with you. So why not just go for this now while you actually can use this as an advantage before we get to a stage where today everybody and their mother has SOC 2. It's table stakes, like we talked about. And so it's no longer a differentiator. You no longer stand out from the crowd. You've got to figure out a new way. So helping customers understand that. And then also the issue in the security industry is vendors are very expensive. You add technology to the equation and you try to sell them the farm, and it scares people, right? And so starting small, I am a big proponent for not trying to shove everything down their throat at once, because people get overwhelmed very easily, and security is no different. So being able to focus on, hey, in the near term, let's just go for the easiest framework or the easiest, let's try to get through this one customer inquiry around security, and then let's go from there. Get a little win under your belt. So that tactic works quite well, at least for us.
Yeah, no, I can see that. All right, so you've talked about sort of compliance 2.0, before. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So really, we're going in this direction where two things really. So you've got the domains of security and compliance and privacy, and they've always kind of lived in their own ecosystems. They've always been divided. You have different people in charge of different things. Those things need to be able to come together. So I really foresee that a lot of compliance and security standards are going to meld in many different ways. You're going to have more what we call crosswalking in the industry, to where you are able to add multiple frameworks and add best practices and be able to outline how you align with each of these standards. And it's called governance. So just having the governance around it to be able to centralize a lot of that rather than have it completely fragmented in different departments and in different documented locations. That's going to be a big piece of this. But what the bigger piece that I see is that we're going to get away from all this manual effort. So I was at Deloitte for a number of years, and I would have these huge enterprises and we would test hundreds of controls. and maybe a handful, as in like 5, would be what we called automated controls, which means there is no human intervention. There is a something happening in a system that then acts upon this risk objective and concludes that a risk has been addressed. And that's crazy to me, because that means that it was completely automated, didn't require human intervention to address a risk. Now, as you start to see the uptick of these, what we call GRC tools in the space, you got a lot of venture-backed companies, the Dradas, the Vantas, the Secure Frames, that are allowing you to take more and more of those controls and make them automated. That is going to be a huge trend, because now you're going to have humans that can't rely on other humans. They need to rely on the system themselves. And so being able to report on that proactively. Today, you go through an audit and an auditor is testing for the last year of things. Those things already happened. That was something could have happened in month 1 and the auditor will find it in month 12, right? And so how can you do what's called this term continuous compliance? How can you start to understand on a continuous basis, how am I complying with these various requirements, and be able to address things in a much rapid manner? So that's really where I see the industry going. The tooling, AI included, is helping us get there. And I think it's going to be fantastic, because it's going to create a lot of job opportunities for folks that are more technically minded. And we're going to get away from humans going and writing policies by hand to being able to work on how to address a risk using AI function and using cool technology. And then it allows humans to work on things that we love and not things that we hate.
Well, and you bring up an interesting point in what you were saying here, is the idea that like most of these compliance standards really capture a point in time. Like PCI is a classic for that, right?
Agreed.
It captures a point in time. And you mentioned earlier, like the Home Depot and Target hacks and things like that. And I knew some of the auditors, around those times too. And there was like, well, didn't they have to do PCI compliance, and weren't they compliant? And like, yeah, they were compliant at that time when the audit happened. And so like the auditor did their job, satisfied the compliance requirements, but that doesn't necessarily mean that company was secure 10 minutes after that that audit.
Exactly.
And also like part of, you mentioned earlier too, like sort of the fudging around the edges of things. A lot of it's about defining the scope of what that audit's going to cover too. And, I've seen a lot of companies, they push a lot of the security outside of the audit to not make it as hard to audit. And that's not helping security. It comes back to that compliance versus security piece again.
It does. Yeah. It's really well summarized. It's unfortunate, but the audit cycle is meant to be an assurance to your customers, because you have a third party that's coming in and testing these controls. But the reality is that they're testing things in the past. And so that doesn't speak to where the control is at today. And even then, if you have a control that you're testing once a year, you've now created an environment where for 12 months, you have no idea what's going on there. So it's unfortunate too, because the Target breach, for example, if they're aligning with PCI, you've got all these doors and windows in your house. PCI is addressing a few of those. It's not locking all of them. You've got to build a multi-pronged strategy that is absolutely addressing all of your weaknesses. And PCI is a great starting point, for example, but it's not the end all be all.
No, for sure. And I like where you're going with the sort of the rise of some of these GRC tools that kind of automate, the constant validation of some of your controls, right? Do you see it having an impact on companies?
I do. And what's cool about those platforms is that they're connecting directly to systems. So you have a SaaS company that's hosting in AWS. You've got a platform like Drata that's connecting to AWS, and it's continuously every, I think, 5 minutes or every 10 minutes, it's reporting on whatever it's testing to say, is this still passing? Is this still passing? And the second that it fails, it's alerting all the administrators in that system. You're now not waiting for an auditor to call it out, which would be terrible, by the way. Now you get to proactively address it from a risk perspective and from an audit perspective. So we're seeing a big impact on basically the effectiveness of security programs, and then also just the the consolidation and the organization of the audits themselves. You've got things that are now central in a tool that's easy to use versus dumping everything in Google Drive and spreadsheets and on your local computer.
Yeah, it's interesting to get people to think about security in that way, and just the sort of the ongoing nature of security. And I think, with those tools, another thing that helps you is the ability to sort of quantify your risk. I like this market of risk quantification as well.
Yeah.
Because I think that, going back to that budget for IT, conversation, you should be taking a risk-based approach to how you invest in your security, right? And you have to know your risk to understand where you should put your money, right?
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. And so just being able to focus on that and identifying, hey, these are my risks. This is where I'm going to throw my money. It's a very relieving exercise for customers, for brands out there, because at least they feel like, okay, well, I'm putting this towards something that I understand. I understand that this is a risk. I understand the impact it could have on our organization, and therefore I'm more comfortable throwing budget at this.
Yeah.
But I do think that we're going to need to lean on AI more, because you've had historically with the quantification of risks, got a lot of people just making up numbers too, right? You're picking impact and severity, and you're just kind of licking your finger and holding it up to the wind of, I think that this could probably happen, twice in the next 5 years, and it's going to cost me $1 billion. We need to be able to lean on. This is where I'm excited about AI, because I think that there's a lot of data out there that can be analyzed to actually determine what my risk is and how much it could cost my business.
Yeah, I think there's that old line about beer. It's the source of and the solution to all my problems. I think that applies to AI as well.
Yes. Well said.
So, I mean, it's great. It's been great talking about security here. Like, before we go out, like, what's your big pep talk you can give to all the people out there listening and just going, oh my God, this is like overwhelming.
Yeah.
What do you say to them?
I think that this is not earth shattering, but to the folks out there that are, if you're a business owner and you're serving other businesses, this isn't going away. So I would highly encourage you to lean in on investing in this early, and not a lot. You don't need to invest a lot. You don't have to go and hire a bunch of companies to accomplish this, but making progress now is a differentiator. And so looking at it, changing your perspective on security and understanding that, hey, this actually could impact my business positively, I think is going to go. It is a huge step in the right direction. There's a lot of cool free, and I know we talked about free tools a couple times, but there's a lot of free resources, free tooling, and very inexpensive tooling on the internet around building a security program. And the last thing I'll say is, ISO and NIST and some of these governing bodies that we've talked about, they put out a ton of free things, free tools, free resources that you can go download things today just to make progress on security. And it's quite easy. So I know that's like the medicine that maybe some people don't want to hear, but I encourage folks to look at this as a differentiator, and be able to use it to kind of put some more fuel in their growth.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. Don't boil the ocean, but just get started.
Yeah,
right.
Just an inch a day. You're
an inch
moving
a day
faster than your competitors. In that
1,000-mile journey starts, but with a single step, right?
Exactly.
It's been great talking to you. I love talking about security. I think this is like, I don't think people think enough about like the compliance aspects of these things too.
Absolutely.
So I think it's great insights on that. Thank you so much for being on. It's been a pleasure. And Taylor, if they want to find you, where should they go?
LinkedIn would be the best place. It's where I'm most active. And Chris, thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor to be here, and you're an awesome host. So please reach out with questions on LinkedIn. I'm happy to be a resource. Hopefully my nerdiness came across on this podcast.
Yeah. And your website's edendata.com, right?
It is. Yep. Exactly.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being on. Look forward to seeing where you guys go with all this and keeping those companies safe. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you to the listeners. Appreciate it.